My name is Jessica Stone, 32 years old, an Army logistics sergeant who used to believe the most dangerous place on Earth was a combat zone in Afghanistan, until I got married. I'm currently standing frozen on the slushy curb of O'Hare Airport in Chicago. My husband, Connor, just tossed my old military duffel bag onto the wet pavement like it was a bag of trash. He isn't going to Hawaii with me for our 8th anniversary, a trip I paid for with every cent of my hazard pay. He's going with Tessa, a senator's daughter young enough to be his intern. From the back seat of his luxury SUV, my mother-in-law Delilah rolled down the tinted window, looked at my worn-out coat, and sneered, "Go home and clean, Jessica. A rough soldier like you was never meant for first class. Connor needs a diplomat for a wife, not a pack mule." They think they have left me behind in humiliation. But they made a fatal calculation error. They forgot I am a logistics expert, and before that plane takes off, I have already changed their destination from paradise to hell. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments, and hit subscribe right now if you believe that when you betray a soldier, you don't just lose a wife, you declare war on a tactician. The heating vents in the Lincoln Navigator were blasting warm air, but I felt a chill that went straight to my marrow. Outside, the gray Chicago sky loomed over Interstate 90, threatening another snowstorm. Inside, the silence was heavier than any rucksack I had ever carried. I looked over at Connor. His hands were gripping the leather steering wheel, knuckles white, his manicured fingernails gleaming under the dashboard lights. I reached out, trying to cover his hand with mine, a hand roughened by years of hauling crates and gripping rifles. He flinched. He pulled his hand away as if I were a piece of barbed wire. "I can't wait for the diving tour on Maui," I said, my voice sounding too loud, too desperate in the quiet cabin. "I spent 3 nights mapping out the best reefs. It's going to be..." "Stop dreaming, Jessica." The voice came from the back seat. Delilah. My mother-in-law adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror with that familiar look of disdain. "You are not suited for the ocean. Salt water will only ruin that skin of yours. It's already leathery enough as it is." I swallowed the lump in my throat, looking down at my hands. They were strong hands, working hands, but in this car, they were just ugly. The Lincoln glided to a stop at Terminal 3. The engine purred, but Connor didn't kill the ignition. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead at the windshield wipers fighting the sleet. "Get out, Jess." I blinked, forcing a nervous laugh. "What?" "Connor, we need to park. The flight is in 2 hours." "You aren't coming." He finally turned to me. His eyes were empty, devoid of the 8 years we had shared. "I'll refund you the money later. This trip, it's political now. It's about networking. Tessa is coming with me." The air left my lungs. "Tessa, the intern? But I paid for the tickets. I paid for the resort." "Tessa knows how to talk to donors," Connor cut in, his voice sharp. "She knows wine lists and policy. You only know supply chains and ammo counts. Frankly, Jessica, you embarrass me at these events." Before I could process the cruelty, the passenger door was yanked open. The biting wind of a Chicago winter slapped me across the face, stinging my eyes. A stretch limousine had pulled up behind us. The door opened, and she stepped out. Tessa. She was a vision of everything I wasn't. 24 years old, platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, skin glowing with a spray tan that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was wrapped in a white mink coat that looked like it had never seen a snowflake. "Oh, hi, Jessica." Her voice was high and sugary. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my faded wool coat. "Connor was right. You really are rustic. Thanks for booking the tickets, by the way. I heard the suite you picked has an ocean view." Connor was out of the car in a second. He walked past me without a glance, moving to Tessa. He wrapped his arm around her waist, a protective, affectionate gesture he hadn't shown me in half a decade. He ushered her toward the trunk of our car, where his Louis Vuitton luggage waited. I stood there, frozen, my boots sinking into the gray slush. I was a statue of humiliation as travelers hurried past, their eyes darting away from the scene. Then came the final blow. The rear window of the Lincoln rolled down completely. Delilah didn't look at me. She looked at the seat I had just vacated. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her purse and began to wipe the leather, scrubbing the spot where I had sat as if I carried a contagious disease. "Don't just stand there like an idiot," she snapped, throwing my heavy olive-drab military duffel bag onto the wet sidewalk. It landed with a wet thud, splashing slush onto my jeans. "Go home, clean the basement. I'm hosting a tea party next week, and I don't want to see any of your dirty combat boots cluttering my hallway. Know your place?" The window rolled up. The Lincoln pulled away, merging into the traffic, its taillights fading into the snow. I stood alone under the departures sign. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from a rage so deep it felt like magma. In my mind, a verse from Sunday school echoed, something I hadn't thought of in years. Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. They had taken my money. They had taken my pride. They had left me in the cold while they flew to paradise on my dime. I looked down at my duffel bag, soaking in the freezing mud. I grabbed the handle. My grip was tight. Why was I still here? Why had I taken this for so long? As the snow began to fall harder, covering the tracks of their luxury SUV, a single thought crystallized in the freezing air. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was strip away the wife, leaving only the soldier behind. And the soldier was angry. I walked through the automatic sliding doors of Terminal 3, seeking refuge from the biting wind, and collapsed onto the nearest hard plastic bench. I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark glass of a ticket kiosk. The woman staring back looked exhausted. Her skin was pale, her eyes rimmed with red, and her posture, usually ramrod straight, was slumped in defeat. I didn't recognize her. Where was Sergeant Stone? Where was the woman who could organize a supply convoy through a sandstorm? Sitting there, shivering in the fluorescent light, the memories of the last 8 years washed over me, not as moments of love, but as a highlight reel of my own erasure. I thought about dinner last Tuesday. I had spent 4 hours in the kitchen, wrestling with a Dutch oven to make coq au vin. I'm a soldier. I eat for fuel. Give me a protein and a carb, and I'm good to go in 10 minutes. But Connor wanted French cuisine. He said it was crucial for his image as a cultured lawyer. I remembered burning my hand on the heavy iron lid. I ran it under cold water for a second, ignored the blister forming on my thumb, and went back to stirring the sauce, terrified it would break. When I finally served it, placing the plate down with trembling hands, Connor took one bite, chewed slowly, and sighed. "It's edible, Jess," he said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "But it still tastes like chow hall food. It lacks finesse. Did you even use the burgundy I told you to buy? It tastes cheap." He didn't see the blister on my thumb. He didn't see the 4 hours of labor. He only saw that his farm girl wife couldn't cook like a Michelin star chef. And like a good soldier following orders, I had apologized. I apologized for feeding him. I reached up and touched my hair. It was long, falling past my shoulders in tangled blonde waves. I hated it. For my entire adult life, I wore my hair in a sharp, tactical bob. It was clean, professional, and stayed out of my face when I was working under the hood of a Humvee. But 3 months into our marriage, Connor told me to grow it out. "A future partner's wife needs hair that looks feminine, Jessica," he had said, running his fingers through it with a possessiveness that made my skin crawl. "Short hair is for men or dykes. You want to look soft. You want to look like someone I can show off." Every morning, brushing this long, heavy curtain felt like putting on a shackle. It was a daily reminder that my body wasn't my own anymore. It was a prop in Connor's stage play. But the memory that cut the deepest, the one that made my chest ache right there in the airport, was the medal. It was 2 years ago. I had received the Meritorious Service Medal for my role in a massive flood relief operation down south. We had moved tons of supplies, saving countless families stranded on rooftops. It was the proudest moment of my career. I brought the medal home, the bronze octagon shining in its velvet case. I wanted to put it on the mantle, just for a day. Delilah had come over for dinner that night. She saw it sitting next to a vase of imported lilies. She picked it up with 2 fingers, her nose wrinkling. "Oh, Jessica," she laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Put this cheap metal away. In this house, we display art. We display culture. We don't turn the living room into a barracks. It's so aggressive. It reminds everyone that you work with your hands." Connor had nodded in agreement. "Mom's right, babe. It clashes with the decor. Put it in storage." I didn't argue. I didn't defend my honor. I took the medal, the symbol of lives I had helped save, and walked to the bedroom. I put it in an old sneaker shoebox and shoved it deep under the bed, alongside the dust bunnies and my self-respect. I know I am not the only one who has hidden parts of themselves to keep the peace. If you have ever felt forced to change who you are just to please someone who didn't appreciate you, please hit that like button right now. And do me a favor, type, "I am enough" in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we don't need anyone's permission to be ourselves. For 8 years, that was the dynamic. They slowly, methodically chipped away at Jessica Stone until there was nothing left but a shell. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "You're just a corn-fed girl from Ohio," Connor would whisper when I tried to voice an opinion on politics. "Without me, you'd be a lonely spinster living in a trailer park. I saved you, Jess. You should be grateful." And the sickest part? I believed him. I believed I was rough. I believed I was uncultured. I believed I was lucky to be allowed into their shiny, golden world, even if I had to enter through the servant's entrance. I looked at my reflection in the glass again. The woman staring back was crying, but the tears were stopping. I remembered a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt that my high school history teacher used to love. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I repeated it in my head. Without your consent. For 8 years, I had given them my consent. I had signed off on every insult, every critique, every erasure of my identity. But as the PA system overhead announced a delay for a flight to Miami, something in my brain clicked into place. The sadness began to evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked down at the phone in my hand. It was the only thing Connor hadn't taken, probably because he thought I was too stupid to do any damage with it. He was wrong. I wasn't just a corn-fed girl, I was a sergeant. I managed logistics for battalions. I knew how to track movement, how to allocate resources, and most importantly, I knew how to cut off a supply line. I wiped the last tear from my cheek. It was time to stop crying over the past and start looking at the assets I had left. I unlocked my phone and opened the banking app. What I saw on the screen made my blood run colder than the Chicago wind outside. My thumb hovered over the blue Chase banking icon on my cracked iPhone screen. The wind outside Terminal 3 was howling, rattling the glass panes, but the cold knot in my stomach had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. I tapped the app. Face ID recognized my swollen, tear-stained face and logged me in. The screen refreshed. My breath hitched in my throat. The savings account ending in 4092, my dream trip fund, was gone. $15,000. Vanished. I stared at the zero balance, my mind flashing back to how I earned that money. That wasn't just a paycheck. That was hazard pay. To accumulate that 15 grand for our 8th anniversary reconciliation trip to Hawaii, I had volunteered for every deployment rotation and every undesirable shift available to an NCO. I remembered driving a heavy expanded mobility tactical truck through a blinding whiteout blizzard in the mountains. The roads slick with black ice, knowing that one wrong turn would send me and my cargo of ammunition off a cliff. I remembered the 18-hour shifts where my body ached so badly I couldn't stand straight, fueled only by lukewarm coffee and the thought of Connor and me finally relaxing on a beach. That money was blood. That money was my life insurance, cashed out in sweat and fear. To Connor, $15,000 was just a number. It was a few bottles of vintage Cabernet to impress his partners. It was a deposit on a rental venue for a fundraiser. But to me, it was 18 months of surviving the things that would make a soft man like him weep. I navigated to the checking tab. And the reality of my marriage hit me harder than any IED shockwave. Connor Stone, the dashing six-voiced, successful lawyer, was a financial mirage. To the outside world, he was the golden boy of the Gold Coast. He drove a Porsche Cayenne, wore Armani suits that cost more than my first car, and picked up the tab at every charity gala. But I knew the truth. The Porsche was a lease he was 3 months behind on. The suits were put on high-interest credit cards that I paid the minimums on. His thriving legal career was actually drowning in debt from 2 failed city council campaigns where he tried to buy popularity he didn't earn. For years, he had treated my steady, government-backed Army paycheck not as a contribution, but as his personal slush fund. He called it managing our portfolio. In reality, he was a parasite wrapped in silk, sucking the life out of the host while complaining about the taste. Ding. A notification banner slid down from the top of my screen. A new transaction had just cleared on the joint credit card, the one where I was the primary account holder because Connor's credit score was in the low 500s. Transaction approved, Chicago Furriers, Gold Coast. Amount, 3,500 Steelers, Drury Stallows. Time, 2 hours ago. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. $3,500. My mind raced back to the image at the curb just 20 minutes ago. Tessa stepping out of the limousine. The way she shimmied her shoulders to show off that pristine white mink coat. The way she sneered at my worn-out wool jacket. Connor was right. You really are rustic. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut. He didn't just leave me behind. He didn't just steal my vacation money. He used my credit card to buy her the coat she was wearing when she took my place. He made me pay for my own humiliation. I looked at the transaction timestamp. 2 hours ago, while I was packing his bags. While I was double-checking his passport. While I was fantasizing about saving our marriage, he was swiping my card to drape dead animals over his mistress's shoulders. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It wasn't a scream. It was the quiet, metallic click of a safety being switched off. The tears that had been streaming down my face stopped instantly. I wiped my cheeks with the rough sleeve of my coat. My eyes, which moments ago were filled with the sorrow of a heartbroken wife, hardened. The sadness evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating focus of a logistics sergeant surveying a battlefield. I remembered my father, a callous-handed corn farmer from Ohio, telling me once while we fixed a tractor engine, "Jesse, never let a man take what you bled to earn. If they steal your harvest, you burn their field." Connor had made a catastrophic tactical error. He was arrogant. He thought because he was the smart lawyer and I was the dumb grunt, he held all the power. But he forgot who paid the bills. He forgot who organized the files. He forgot that in modern warfare, the person who controls the supply line controls the outcome. He had left me on the curb with nothing but my old military duffel bag. He thought it was trash. But he didn't know what was inside. I reached down and unzipped the heavy canvas bag. Pushing aside the folded uniforms and wool socks, my hand found the cold, magnesium alloy casing of my Panasonic Toughbook. It was a military-grade laptop, built to survive sandstorms, drops, and extreme temperatures. It was ugly, bulky, and indestructible, just like me. I pulled it out and set it on the small coffee table in the airport seating area. I flipped open the latch. The screen flickered to life, the fan whirring with a sound that felt like a growl. Connor was in the air now, sipping champagne, thinking he had won. He thought he had cut me loose. I cracked my knuckles. "You want a war, Connor?" I whispered to the empty seat beside me. "You just deployed a logistics expert against your own bank account." I logged into the system. The counteroffensive had begun. I found a secluded table in the far corner of the terminal's Starbucks, right next to a dusty power outlet. I didn't buy a coffee. I didn't need the caffeine. The adrenaline flooding my system was potent enough to jumpstart a tank. I unzipped my duffel bag and pulled out the Panasonic Toughbook. It wasn't a sleek silver MacBook like the ones the hipsters at the next table were using. It was a black magnesium alloy brick, 2 inches thick, designed to survive a drop from a helicopter or a sandstorm in Kandahar. As I plugged it in, the screen hummed to life, casting a harsh blue glow on my face. A young couple walked past my table. The man was wearing army fatigues, a specialist patch on his chest. He was holding his wife's hand with both of his, looking at her like she was the only person in the crowded airport. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect. For a split second, the old Jessica, the wife who just wanted to be loved, flared up in my chest. I felt a pang of jealousy so sharp it nearly doubled me over. I deserved that. I had earned that. But then I heard Connor's voice in my head, echoing from the car ride. You have no strategic mind, Jessica. You only know how to follow orders. My jaw tightened. The sadness evaporated, burned away by a cold, tactical fury. I will never accept defeat. I whispered to the screen, the first line of the soldier's creed vibrating in my throat. I will never quit. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an operator in the field, and I had just identified a hostile target. I navigated to the travel agency's portal. I didn't need to hack anything. Connor, in his infinite arrogance, had given me the keys to the castle just last night. I closed my eyes, remembering the scene in our kitchen. Connor was busy texting Tessa, smiling at his phone like a lovesick teenager. I had placed a stack of documents in front of him. Travel forms, I had said. Just standard procedure for the upgrade protocols. He didn't even read them, he just scribbled his signature, that sweeping, pretentious autograph he practiced for his future political career, and waved me away. Handle it, Jess. Stop bothering me with admin. He thought he was signing a baggage waiver. He was actually signing a general power of attorney for travel management. It gave me, Jessica Stone, full legal authority to modify, cancel, or redirect all travel plans in his name for the next 14 days in the event of unforeseen logistical changes. He had handed the supply chain over to the logistics sergeant. I opened a secure browser window. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Not the dainty tapping of a secretary, but the rhythmic, forceful strikes of someone inputting coordinates for an airstrike. Current itinerary. Passenger, Connor Stone, Tessa Banks, Delilah Stone. Destination, Four Seasons Resort, Maui, Hawaii. Status, confirmed. I hit modify. But before I confirmed the new coordinates, I needed ground support. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice. Stone, a voice grumbled on the other end. It sounded like gravel in a blender. Bear, I said. I need a favor, a big one. Mike the Bear. Kowalski was a former Special Forces operator who had retired to Alaska to run extreme survival tours. His idea of a vacation was dropping people in the middle of the tundra with a knife and a flint striker. I'm listening, Mike said. I have 3 VIPs coming your way. I need to activate the Dead Horse package. The hardcore one, no glamping, no heaters, just the raw experience. Mike chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Dead Horse in January? It's 25 below zero, Jess. That's not a vacation. That's a survival, evasion, resistance, and escape drill. Perfect, I said. They need a reality check. Make sure Big Jim meets them at the airstrip. And Mike, no refunds. Strict no cancellation policy. Copy that, Sergeant. Send 'em up. We'll keep the polar bears away. Mostly. I hung up. The ground asset was secured. I turned back to the laptop. It was time for the final strike. I deleted Maui, HIOGG. In the destination field, I typed Dead Horse, AK, SCC. The system flashed a weather warning, severe cold advisory. Extremities, frostbite warning. I ignored it. I scrolled down to the Notes for Travelers section, the message that would pop up on Connor's phone. I typed, Congratulations. Due to your platinum status, you have been upgraded to the exclusive Northern Lights Executive Experience, a private, off-the-grid adventure favored by billionaires seeking true isolation. It was the perfect bait. Connor's ego was so inflated he would believe he was being treated like Elon Musk, right up until the moment his Italian loafers hit the ice. My finger hovered over the Enter key. This was it. Once I pressed this, there was no going back. I was effectively burning down my marriage, my home, and my old life. I looked at the empty chair across from me. I thought about the credit card notification. I thought about Delilah wiping the seat. I thought about Tessa's smirk. Enjoy the view, I whispered. I slammed my finger down on the key. Processing. Confirmed. A notification popped up. Itinerary updated. Email sent to primary traveler. I sat back, the fan of the tough book whirring in the silence. The trap was sprung, the supply line was cut, and the enemy was flying blind into a frozen hell of my own design. I unplugged the laptop, slid it into my bag, and stood up. I didn't look tired anymore. I checked my watch. It was time to go home and execute Phase 2. Inside the United Club lounge at O'Hare, the air smelled of stale coffee and expensive perfume, a scent that Connor Stone inhaled deeply as he sat in a leather armchair. He swirled a glass of complimentary scotch, feeling like the king of Chicago, when his phone chimed with a priority notification. He glanced at the screen and his eyes widened in genuine delight. "Mom! Tessa! You have to see this," Connor exclaimed, waving his iPhone like a winning lottery ticket to catch their attention. Delilah lowered her copy of Vogue, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow at her son's outburst. "What is it, Connor? Keep your voice down. You're making a scene." "It's the travel confirmation," Connor said, a smug grin spreading across his face as he turned the screen toward them. "Look, the agency just sent an update. Apparently, because of my platinum status, and probably Jessica's obsessive rechecking of the booking, we've been upgraded." The email, designed with a sleek, black and gold interface that screamed exclusivity, read, "Upgrade confirmed. Northern Lights Executive Package. Destination, exclusive." Tessa perked up from her phone, where she was busy editing a selfie, and frowned slightly. "Northern Lights? Wait, isn't that like where the Kardashians went last winter? In Finland or something?" "It says here it's an off-grid experience favored by billionaires seeking true isolation," Connor read aloud, puffing out his chest with self-importance. "This isn't just a vacation. This is elite access." Jessica must have accidentally clicked a promo code she didn't understand. God, she's so incompetent she actually helped us. Delilah smoothed her skirt, a rare smile touching her lips as she considered the social implications. "Well, finally that girl does something useful. Honestly, Connor, I was dreading Hawaii. It's so pedestrian. Everyone goes to Maui, but a private northern retreat? That sounds much more dignified. Just imagine the photos for the Christmas card." "Exactly," Connor said, standing up and buttoning his blazer with renewed confidence. "Grab your bags, ladies. Our private charter awaits." 20 minutes later, the group stood on the windswept tarmac of the private airfield section, expecting a sleek Gulfstream jet. Instead, they found themselves staring at a rugged, twin-engine turboprop plane painted a dull gray. It looked less like a luxury liner and more like something out of an Indiana Jones movie, sitting squat and heavy on the runway. Tessa wrinkled her nose, her voice dropping an octave in disappointment. "Connor, it has propellers, and it's tiny. Is this safe? I thought we were getting a jet." Connor hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his ego quickly filled in the gaps. He wrapped an arm around her, chuckling condescendingly. "Babe, you don't understand the aesthetic. This is how the real money travels. The billionaires don't fly flashy jets to these exclusive lodges. They fly bush vintage. It's about rustic luxury. It's authentic." "It's loud," Tessa complained as the engines fired up with a deafening roar, but she let Connor guide her up the narrow metal stairs. Inside, the cabin was compact, with worn leather seats and walls that vibrated with the hum of the engines. A flight attendant, a burly man with a thick beard who looked like he wrestled bears for fun, handed them hot towels. This was one of Mike's guys, though Connor didn't know that. "Champagne?" the attendant asked, his voice gravelly as he held out a tray with 3 crystal flutes filled with bubbling gold liquid. "Now we're talking," Delilah said, taking a glass. "At least the service is up to par." What they didn't know was that Jessica had given specific instructions for this bottle. It wasn't poison, she wasn't a murderer. But it was laced with a potent, fast-acting sedative mix usually prescribed for severe insomnia. She needed them asleep before the landscape shifted from the gray sprawl of the Midwest to the blinding white nothingness of the Arctic. Tessa held up her glass, angling it for the perfect boomerang video on Instagram. "Cheers to us," she squealed. And cheers to finally getting rid of the dead weight. Connor clinked his glass against hers, a cruel smile playing on his lips. 2 upgrades, he said, in travel and in wives. They downed the champagne. It was crisp, cold, and tasted like victory. It didn't take long for the victory to knock them out. 40 minutes into the flight, Tessa was the first to succumb, her phone slipping from her manicured fingers onto the floor mat as her head lolled onto Connor's shoulder. Delilah followed shortly after, her head tipping back against the headrest, a soft snore replacing her usual complaints. Connor fought it the longest, staring out the window as the plane climbed higher. But eventually his eyelids grew heavy, and he slumped forward into a deep, chemical sleep. While the passengers slumbered, oblivious to the world changing beneath them, the plane crossed the border into Canada. The sprawling highways and farmlands of the Midwest gave way to dense forests, which slowly turned to brown, and then to an endless, blinding white as they crossed the 66th parallel north. Inside Connor's pocket, his smartphone screen lit up one last time before the signal bars dropped from 4 to 1 to no service. Back at O'Hare, miles away in the safety of the terminal, Jessica sat alone at her small table, watching the blue dot on her laptop screen crawling steadily northward. She took a sip of her lukewarm black coffee, finding it more satisfying than any champagne she had ever shared with Connor. "Sleep tight, sweetheart," she whispered to the screen as the dot moved into the territories where Google Maps stopped showing road names. "When you wake up, you're going to wish you were still dreaming." With a sense of finality, she closed the laptop with a snap, zipped up her duffel bag, and walked toward the exit. The automatic doors parted for her, and for the first time in 8 years, the cold Chicago wind didn't make her shiver. It just felt like fresh air. The dream ended not with a soft nudge, but with a violent, bone-rattling slam. The landing gear of the twin-engine turboprop hit the frozen gravel of the Deadhorse airstrip with the grace of a brick dropped from a skyscraper. Inside the cabin, the sudden impact jolted Connor, Tessa, and Delilah out of their chemically induced slumber. The champagne flutes, which had been left on the tray tables, went flying, shattering against the metal bulkheads. "My neck!" Delilah shrieked, clutching her pearls as the plane skidded sideways, fighting for traction on the ice before shuddering to a halt. Connor blinked, his head throbbing with the heavy cotton wool hangover of the sedative. He shook himself awake, expecting to see the lush, emerald peaks of Maui or the pristine, manicured snow of a private aspen lodge outside the window. He rubbed the condensation off the plexiglass and looked out. His jaw dropped. There were no palm trees. There was no charming log cabin with smoke curling from a stone chimney. There was only an endless, terrifying expanse of white, broken only by the skeletal black silhouettes of industrial oil rigs in the distance. The sky wasn't blue. It was a flat, oppressive gray that merged with the ground, creating a disorienting void. "Connor?" Tessa moaned, rubbing her eyes, her mascara smeared across her cheek. "Why is it so bright? Where is the limo?" I don't know," Connor stammered, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. "Maybe this is just the refueling stop." Before he could formulate a lie that made sense, the cabin door was thrown open from the outside. It wasn't a warm tropical breeze that greeted them. It was a physical assault. The wind, howling at 25 degrees below zero, rushed into the cabin like a pack of invisible wolves. It didn't just make you shiver, it burned. It felt like 1,000 needles stabbing every inch of exposed skin. "Move it! Let's go! The engine creates a heat seal and you're letting it all out," a voice boomed over the wind. Tessa stepped to the doorway, still groggy. She was wearing her white mink coat, which was fashionable but unlined, and a pair of open-toed Gucci stilettos. "Ew, it's freezing!" she screeched. She took one step onto the metal stairs, which were coated in a thin layer of hoarfrost. Her heels slipped. She flailed, sliding down the last 3 steps and landing in a heap on the hard-packed snow. "My shoes! My coat!" she wailed, scrambling to get up. But the wind caught her short skirt, whipping it up and exposing her legs to the brutal Arctic air. Her spray tan looked ridiculous against the stark, industrial backdrop. Waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs wasn't a concierge with a lei. It was a mountain of a man. Standing 6'5", covered in a grease-stained parka with a beard that already had icicles forming on it, stood Big Jim. "Welcome to the Extreme Survival Outpost," Jim shouted, his voice gravelly and devoid of any customer service warmth. "I'm your handler. Grab your bags. If you stop moving, the sweat freezes against your skin and you get hypothermia. Move!" Delilah stumbled down the stairs, clutching her designer handbag. She looked around at the desolate landscape, the rusting machinery, the piles of gravel, the absolute lack of civilization. "This is unacceptable," she shouted over the wind, her teeth already chattering violently. "I want to speak to the manager. Where is the hotel? Where is the Northern Lights Executive Suite?" Big Jim let out a laugh that sounded like a barking seal. He pointed a thick, gloved finger toward a row of 3 rusted shipping containers sitting on concrete blocks about 50 yards away. They were painted a fading industrial orange. Smoke puffed pitifully from a crooked stovepipe sticking out of the roof of the middle one. "There's your suite, lady," Jim grinned, his teeth yellow. "Refurbished shipping containers. No electricity, no running water. You got a wood stove inside, but you gotta chop your own wood. That's the Back to Roots package you folks signed up for." Delilah looked at the rusted metal box, then at the desolate tundra, and her eyes rolled back in her head. She swayed, nearly fainting. But Connor caught her just in time. "This is a mistake," Connor yelled, his face turning pale. He fumbled for his iPhone with freezing fingers. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm suing you. I'm suing the agency. I'm suing everyone." He tapped the screen frantically. He held the phone up to the gray sky. No service. "No signal out here, city boy," Jim said, crossing his massive arms. "Satellite only. And the sat phone costs $50 a minute. Cash." Connor lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Jim's parka. "You don't understand. We are not supposed to be here. My wife, Jessica, she messed this up. Take us back. Take us back right now." Jim didn't flinch. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a laminated piece of paper. He shoved it in Connor's face. "Jessica didn't mess anything up," Jim said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "She was very specific. Look at the signature." Connor stared at the document. It was the power of attorney he had signed the night before, thinking it was a luggage waiver, and below it was the contract for the Dead Horse Survival Experience. "It says right here," Jim tapped the paper, "non-refundable, non-cancelable, mandatory 7-day duration. If you tap out early, the plane doesn't come back. You have to walk. It's 500 miles down the Dalton Highway to the nearest heated hotel, and the Grizzlies are hungry this time of year. If you are cheering for this instant dose of karma right now, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, do they deserve this? Type yes if you think justice is being served." Connor looked at his signature, that arrogant, sweeping scrawl he was so proud of. It was his death warrant. He looked at Tessa, who was crying and trying to warm her freezing toes. He looked at his mother, who was hyperventilating against a snowbank. And then he looked at the endless, unforgiving white hell surrounding him. Connor Stone, the man who thought he ruled Chicago, sank to his knees in the snow. The cold seeped through his Armani trousers instantly, but it was nothing compared to the chill of realizing that Jessica, the wife he called stupid, the soldier he called useless, had just outflanked him completely. While Connor and his entourage were discovering the bone-deep chill of the Arctic Circle, I was stepping out of a warm Uber in front of the house we had shared for 8 years. The suburban Chicago street was quiet, the lawns covered in a pristine layer of snow that sparkled under the streetlights. It looked like a postcard of the American dream, but I knew the rot that lived inside number 402. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The silence that greeted me wasn't the lonely, oppressive silence I used to dread when Connor was out networking late at night. This was different. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a battlefield after the smoke clears. It was peaceful. I dropped my keys on the console table and looked up at the wall. Hanging there was a massive, abstract painting that Delilah had insisted we buy. She claimed it represented modern complexity. To me, it just looked like someone had spilled mustard on a gray canvas. Mission ended, I said aloud to the empty room. I reached up, took the painting off the wall, and set it facing the baseboard. I did the same with the pretentiously vague sculptures in the hallway. I wasn't destroying them, I was simply decommissioning the base. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom, the carpet soft under my feet. This room had always felt like a showroom, not a sanctuary. I opened Connor's walk-in closet. The smell of his cedar cologne lingered, a scent that used to make my heart race but now just made me nauseous. I didn't reach for scissors. I didn't reach for lighter fluid. I wasn't going to be the crazy ex-wife on the news. I was a professional. I reached for a roll of hefty contractor bags, the thick black plastic ones designed for construction debris. I started with the suits. The Armani, the Hugo Boss, the custom-tailored blazers he wore to fundraisers while I sat at home budgeting for groceries. I pulled them off the hangers in armfuls and stuffed them into the bags. Then came the Italian leather loafers, the silk ties, and the collection of watches he bought to impress people he didn't even like. I tied the first bag shut with a tactical knot, then the second, then the third. I grabbed a permanent marker and wrote in bold black letters on the side of each bag. Donation, Downtown Homeless Shelter. Connor always talked about how much he wanted to uplift the community during his failed political campaigns. Well, I was about to help him become the most generous donor in the city. He was going to dress the homeless population of Chicago in Italian silk. It was a tax write-off he would never get to claim, but the irony kept me warm. With the closet stripped bare, I walked over to my nightstand. In the bottom drawer, buried under old receipts, was a leather-bound journal. I opened it to a page dated 6 months ago. The handwriting was shaky, stained with dried tear marks. Just try a little harder, Jess, I had written. Learn to like the wine he likes. Lose 5 more pounds. If you just mold yourself enough, maybe they will finally love you. I stared at the words. They sounded like the pleas of a stranger. I didn't feel sad for that woman anymore. I felt a fierce desire to protect her memory. I ripped the page out with a sharp zip, crumpled it into a ball, and tossed it into the trash can. Negative, I whispered. No more trying. I left the bedroom and headed down to the basement. This was the place Delilah had banished me to, telling me to clean my mess. She was right about one thing. My true self was down here. I pulled my old military footlocker out from the storage crawlspace. It smelled of canvas and gun oil. I popped the latches. Inside, folded neatly, was my life. I took off my jeans and the sweater Connor had picked out for me. I pulled on a pair of cargo pants and a simple olive drab t-shirt. Then, I lifted out my Belleville tactical boots. The soles were worn from the rocks of Afghanistan, the leather scuffed from crawling under trucks. I sat on the cold concrete floor and laced them up. Left over right, pull tight, knot. I stood up and stomped my heel. The sound echoed solidly off the walls. I caught my reflection in the dusty basement window. The tired, shrinking housewife was gone. Staring back at me was Sergeant Stone. I looked stronger. I looked dangerous. I marched back upstairs, the heavy thud of my boots sounding like a drumbeat of war on the hardwood floors. I sat at Connor's mahogany desk, the one he never let me touch, and opened his laptop. I logged into our joint bank account. Since I was the primary account holder due to his abysmal credit score, I had full administrative privileges. I initiated a wire transfer. I moved every single cent of my personal savings, plus the household management funds I'd contributed, over to my USAA account, a military bank that Connor couldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Then, I went down the list of recurring payments. Gold Coast Country Club membership? Cancelled. Wine Spectator magazine? Cancelled. Bi-weekly maid service? Cancelled. Premium cable package? Cancelled. I watched the active subscriptions list turn into a graveyard of red text. When I closed the laptop, the house was truly silent. It was empty of his presence, empty of his clutter, and empty of his money. I sat back in the leather chair, resting my boots on the edge of the expensive desk. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of absolute freedom. I was just closing my eyes to enjoy the peace when the silence was shattered. Ring, 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 ring. My cell phone, sitting on the desk, lit up. It wasn't a local number. It was a satellite connection ID. I looked at the screen and smiled. The intelligence report from the front lines was coming in. The gas fireplace in my living room hummed with a steady, comforting warmth, casting a soft orange glow across the empty floorboards. Outside, the Chicago wind was whipping against the siding, but inside, the temperature was a perfect 72 degrees. I sat in the leather armchair, my feet propped up on the ottoman, holding a glass of Cabernet. It was a $5 bottle from Trader Joe's, the kind Connor wouldn't use to marinate a steak, let alone drink. But tonight, as the rich, dark liquid hit my tongue, it tasted better than any vintage Bordeaux I had ever been forced to sip at his fundraisers. It tasted like freedom. On the coffee table, my phone lit up. The screen displayed a long, unfamiliar number starting with a country code that didn't belong to any nation. It was a satellite uplink ID. I didn't pick up. I let it ring. 1, 2, 3. I took another sip of wine, imagining the scene on the other end of that connection. 3,000 miles away, inside a rusted shipping container in Deadhorse, Alaska, the situation was undoubtedly deteriorating. It was day 3. By now, the novelty of the adventure would have worn off, replaced by the brutal reality of survival. I pictured Tessa. The girl who thought camping meant a glamping pod with Wi-Fi was probably huddled in the corner. I imagined her trying to light the wood stove. Big Jim wouldn't have given them matches. He would have given them a flint striker and steel. I could almost see her, shivering in her ruined stilettos, sacrificing her $500 Hermes silk scarf as tinder because she couldn't get a spark on the damp wood. I pictured the food situation. They would have run out of the complimentary protein bars yesterday. Now they were on the MREs, meals ready to eat, that Big Jim would have tossed onto the frozen floor like dog treats. I knew the menu: cold spaghetti with meat sauce, congealed in its plastic pouch because they couldn't figure out how to use the chemical flameless ration heater. The ringing stopped. A moment later, a notification popped up. New voicemail. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. The first voice was a shriek, distorted by static and wind. "You bitch! You absolute psycho!" It was Tessa. She sounded like a banshee. "Do you know what you've done? My hair is frozen to my hood. I broke a nail trying to open a can of beans. I'm going to tell my daddy. He's a senator. He'll have you arrested for kidnapping. He'll—" Her threat dissolved into a jagged, pathetic sob. "Please, it's so cold. I can't feel my toes. Why's the toilet a bucket? I want to go home." There was a scuffling sound, the phone being snatched away. Then came the wheezing. "Jessica?" It was Delilah. The imperious ironclad matriarch sounded small and broken. Her asthma, triggered by the dry Arctic air, was making every breath a struggle. "Jessica, dear, listen to me. I know we've had our differences, but you can't leave us here. I'm an old woman. I'll give you the pearls. You know the ones? The South Sea strand you always admired. They're yours. Just send the helicopter. Please, Jessica. I'm begging you." I swirled the wine in my glass. The pearls. She thought 8 years of emotional abuse could be erased with a piece of jewelry she used to dangle in front of me like a carrot. Then, the final voice came on. "Jess?" It was Connor. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound arrogant. He sounded defeated. "Jess, you have to answer. You made your point, okay? You win. This place, it's hell." I could hear the wind howling in the background, rattling the metal walls of their container. "Tessa is... she's useless, Jess," Connor whispered, his voice cracking. "She hasn't stopped screaming for 2 days. She burned her scarf and nearly set the bedding on fire. She doesn't know how to do anything. I'm hungry, babe. I miss your cooking. I miss that soup you make when it snows. I think I made a mistake. A big one. Please, pick up, call the pilot. When we get back, I'll end it with her. I promise. Just come get me." The message ended. I sat in the silence, the warmth of the fire lapping at my skin. Connor didn't miss me. He missed my utility. He missed the soup. He missed the logistics manager who made his life seamless. He was realizing that his trophy mistress was just that, a trophy. Pretty to look at, but useless when the heat went out. He wasn't sorry he betrayed me. He was sorry he was uncomfortable. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I felt a profound sense of disgust, clean and sharp. I picked up the phone. I wasn't going to call back. That would cost me $50 a minute, and I wasn't spending another dime on them. Instead, I opened the text messaging app. I typed a message to Big Jim's satellite number, knowing he would pass the handset to Connor one last time. I thought about what to write. Should I gloat? Should I curse? No. Delilah loved to weaponize religion to make me feel small. She loved to quote scripture to justify her snobbery. It was only fitting I spoke to them in a language they understood. I typed out a single verse from Galatians chapter 6, verse 7. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked, for whatever one sows, that will he also reap. I hit send. I watched the progress bar inch across the screen until it said, delivered. Then, I tapped the info icon next to the contact. I scrolled down to the bottom of the screen, past the call logs and the message history. My finger hovered over the red text. Block caller. I tapped it. Block contact? You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list. Confirm. The phone went silent. The bridge was burned. The supply line was permanently severed. I set the phone down, picked up my glass, and finished the last of the wine. It had a cheap, vinegary bite at the end. But tonight, it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. I stared into the fire, finally warm, finally alone, and finally free. 7 days after the Northern Lights charter plane had vanished into the gray expanse of the Canadian wilderness, it touched down again at O'Hare International Airport. But the group that shuffled down the metal stairs didn't look like the high-flying socialites who had departed a week earlier. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck. Connor Stone, usually the picture of Chicago Polish in his Italian suits, was unrecognizable. His face was gaunt, covered in a patchy wild beard, and his skin was wind-burned to a raw, peeling red. He was wearing dirty thermal layers that smelled of wood smoke and unwashed desperation. Behind him, Delilah was being wheeled out by a paramedic, coughing violently into a blanket, her face gray with the early stages of pneumonia. But it was Tessa who completed the tableau of misery. The senator's daughter was limping heavily, her feet encased in oversized medical boots, provided by the Dead Horse Clinic, to treat the second-degree frostbite on her toes. Her once pristine platinum hair was matted under a greasy wool hat, and the white mink coat, now stained with soot and mud, hung off her shoulders like a rag. They walked through the private terminal doors, expecting to slip away in shame. Instead, they were blinded by a wall of flashing lights. Jessica hadn't just sat at home drinking wine, she'd made a few anonymous phone calls. The local press and a stringer for a national tabloid were waiting. Connor, is it true you endangered Senator Banks's daughter? Tessa, look over here. Was it a survivalist retreat or a kidnapping? The cameras clicked furiously, capturing every detail of their humiliation. Connor tried to shield his face with his hand, but it was too late. The headline was practically writing itself. Frozen Assets, the disastrous Arctic getaway of Chicago's elite. Before they could even reach the curb, the alliance crumbled. Tessa stopped walking. She turned to Connor, her eyes blazing with a hatred that could melt ice. Get away from me, she hissed, loud enough for the reporters to hear. Tessa, baby, wait, Connor pleaded, reaching for her arm. We can spin this. We can say it was a charity endurance challenge. Don't touch me, she shrieked, shoving him away. You are a fraud, Connor. You're weak, you're broke, and you're a loser. My father was right about you. A black SUV with government plates pulled up. A stern-looking aide stepped out and ushered Tessa inside. She didn't look back. As the car sped away, Connor stood alone on the sidewalk, watching his political connections and his trophy vanish into traffic. Delilah was loaded into an ambulance, muttering about how she would never be able to show her face at the club again. Connor caught a cab, his hands shaking with rage. He was going home. He was going to sue Jessica for everything she had. He was going to ruin her. But when the taxi pulled up to the house on the quiet suburban street, Jessica wasn't there. Standing on the front porch, briefcase in hand, was a man in a sharp gray suit. It was Robert Henderson, one of the toughest divorce attorneys in the city, and an old Army JAG officer Jessica had served with. Connor stormed up the driveway. "Where is she? I'm calling the police. She kidnapped us." Henderson didn't blink. He calmly handed Connor a thick manila envelope. "Mr. Stone, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Inside, you will find a copy of the general power of attorney you signed, granting my client full legal authority over your travel itinerary. You will also find a liability waiver for the Dead Horse Experience, also signed by you." "I didn't read it," Connor spat. "That's fraud." "That's negligence," Henderson corrected coldly. "But if you want to go to court, we welcome it. Because also in that envelope are 27 photographs of you and Ms. Banks entering hotels, restaurants, and that plane, dated during your marriage. In this state, adultery can impact asset division significantly. And I imagine Senator Banks wouldn't appreciate those photos becoming public record during a trial. It would be political suicide." Connor froze. He looked at the envelope. He was checkmated. If he sued, he exposed his affair and his stupidity to the world. If he stayed quiet, he lost only his pride. "She's gone, Connor," Henderson said, stepping aside. "The house is yours. Or, at least, the lease is." Connor unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was eerily silent. It wasn't just quiet. It was hollow. The abstract paintings were gone. The sculptures were gone. He walked into the living room, and it felt larger, colder. He ran upstairs to the master bedroom, throwing open his closet doors, expecting to find comfort in his expensive suits. He found nothing but empty hangers rattling on the metal rod. Panic rising in his chest, he ran back downstairs to the kitchen. The granite island, usually cluttered with Delilah's magazines and his campaign flyers, was bare. Sitting in the exact center of the island were 3 items: his house key, his platinum wedding band, and a single, bright yellow post-it note. Connor walked over and picked up the note. Jessica's handwriting was neat, sharp, and military precise. "Connor, consider the last week your tuition. You finally learned that a pretty face doesn't keep you warm, and a big ego doesn't pay the bills. I've graduated. P.S. I transferred my share of the savings out. And rent is due on the 1st. You're currently overdrawn. Sergeant Stone." Connor crumpled the note in his fist. He looked around the empty kitchen of the rental house he could no longer afford, wearing dirty clothes with no wife to cook for him, no mistress to flatter him, and no mother to fund him. For the first time in his life, Connor Stone was exactly where he deserved to be, entirely on his own. Miles away, on Interstate 90, a Ford F-150 drove steadily eastward. Jessica didn't look in the rearview mirror. She rolled down the window, letting the cold air hit her face. It didn't bite anymore. It felt like the wind before a sunrise. She turned up the radio, singing along to a country song, driving not away from a home, but toward a future she had finally reclaimed. 2 months later, the sky over Joint Base Andrews in Maryland was a piercing, brilliant blue. The biting winter winds of Chicago felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by the crisp, energetic breeze of early spring in the nation's capital. I stood on the tarmac, the roar of jet engines filling the air like the heartbeat of a giant. I looked down at my chest. There, pinned securely to my freshly pressed uniform, was a new ID badge. It didn't say Mrs. Connor Stone. It didn't say housewife. It read, Jessica Stone, Senior Strategic Logistics Advisor, the Pentagon. I ran my thumb over the laminated plastic. This was the job I had turned down 3 years ago. Back then, Connor had thrown a tantrum, telling me that working at the Pentagon would make me too masculine, that the commute would take time away from his dinner parties, that a wife's place was supporting her husband's local ambitions, not advising generals on global supply chains. I had listened to him then. I had made myself small to fit into his pocket. But today, I was standing tall. My boots were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the tarmac. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to shrink. "Hey, Sergeant Stone." Or should I say, Madam Advisor now? I turned around to see Master Sergeant Rodriguez walking toward me, a grin splitting his weather-beaten face. Rodriguez had been my platoon sergeant in Kandahar. He had seen me at my worst, covered in mud, exhausted, terrified, and he had never once looked down on me. Rodriguez, I smiled, the expression feeling genuine and easy on my face. Don't get formal on me now. He didn't offer a polite, limp handshake like the socialites in Chicago. He pulled me into a crushing bear hug, slapping my back with a hand that felt like a shovel. Welcome back to the fight, Jess, he said, pulling away and looking me in the eye. We missed you. The new lieutenants don't know how to route a convoy to save their lives. We need you. I looked around at the crew prepping the aircraft, men and women of every race and background, working in perfect synchronization. Their hands were stained with grease, their boots were scuffed. They were loud, they were rough, and they were real. For 8 years, I had chased the approval of a family that saw me as a prop. I had tried to buy my way into a circle that only cared about pedigree and pearls. Standing here, surrounded by the smell of JP-8 jet fuel and the sound of banter, I realized the truth. Family isn't about bloodlines, and it certainly isn't about a marriage license. Family are the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the tracers are flying. Family are the ones who don't care if your hands are rough, as long as they are strong enough to hold the line. Ready to go up, Stone? Rodriguez asked, gesturing to the beast parked behind him. It was a C-130 Hercules, a massive 4-engine transport plane that looked like an angry bulldog with wings. It wasn't a luxury private charter. It didn't serve champagne. It vibrated. It was loud, and it smelled like exhaust. It was beautiful. Born ready, I said. I climbed the ramp, my combat boots gripping the non-slip metal. I didn't head for a plush leather seat. I sat on the red nylon cargo netting along the fuselage wall, strapping myself in. A crew chief handed me a steaming styrofoam cup. Black coffee, Sarge. Hot. Thanks. I took a sip. It was bitter, strong, and scorched my tongue slightly. It was perfect. The engines roared to life, a symphony of power that vibrated through the soles of my feet. As the plane taxied and thundered down the runway, I felt the familiar pull of G-force pressing me back. We lifted off, climbing steep and fast. I looked out the small porthole window. Below us, the monuments of Washington, D.C. shrank into miniature. The Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, the sprawling pentagonal fortress where I would report for duty on Monday. My mind drifted briefly to Connor. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment on the wrong side of town, dodging creditors and trying to salvage his reputation. Delilah was alone in her big, empty house, nursing her pneumonia and her bitterness. I waited for the anger to come, but it didn't. Hate takes energy, and I had none left for them. I just felt detached, like they were characters in a bad book I'd finished reading and put back on the shelf. General George S. Patton once said, "Success is how high you bounce when you hit bottom." 2 months ago, I was on a curb at O'Hare, hitting the absolute bottom. I was trash on the sidewalk. But they forgot what I was made of. You can drop a glass vase and it shatters. But if you drop a rubber ball or a soldier, we don't break. We bounce. The C-130 banked left, the sunlight flooding the cabin, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I closed my eyes, letting the sun warm my face, feeling the hum of the aircraft in my bones. They wanted to bury me. They threw me away like dirt. But they made a critical mistake. They forgot that I wasn't trash, I was a seed. And for the last 2 months, while they froze in the winter they created, I was germinating. I was growing roots in the dark, and now I had broken through the soil. I took another sip of the black coffee, watching the horizon stretch out endlessly before me. No more looking back. The mission was accomplished. "This is Sergeant Stone," I whispered to the roar of the engines. "Before I go, I want to leave you with one final thought. My journey wasn't just about getting even, it was about remembering who I was. Life, and sometimes the people we love, will try to put us in a box. They will label us too old, too rough, or not enough. But I learned that dignity isn't a gift someone gives you. It is a fortress you build yourself. When betrayal strikes, the easy path is to break down. The hard path, the warrior's path, is to stand up, check your inventory, and use your pain as fuel. You have skills, experiences, and a strength inside you that no one can take away unless you let them. Never apologize for being strong. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you had to remind someone, or perhaps remind yourself, of your true worth? Or maybe you're currently fighting a battle in silence? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and we are building a community of survivors here, not victims. If my story gave you a spark of hope or a sense of justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's make sure no one ever feels like they have to fight their battles alone. Until next time, stay strong and keep moving forward.